All right. So, because of how I'm setting this up, I can't actually see everybody. So if you have questions and stuff, I'll be more than happy to answer them after I do the reading thing. So keep that in mind as well while I'm reading. I appreciate everybody asking questions, but I can't actually answer questions until I'm in front of my phone again. And my phone is over there. So today I'm going to be reading The Stars Are Right by me, K.M. Alexander. I'm going to read the prologue. I was considering reading something from the second book, which just came out, but I decided I didn't want any spoilers, so bear with me. Prologue. The Stars Are Right. The doorbell sang out its soft tinkle as the shopkeep shuffled to place his new product on the shelves behind him. He slipped old, worn boxes and small leather clutches with frayed edges into various cubbies that covered the wall behind the shop's small counter. Bifocals here, trifocals there, red boxes, blue boxes, brown pouches, and the cases that were the faded gray of granite. He hummed tunelessly along with the shop's crackly radio as he worked. The spectacle shop was old, long, and narrow, with glass front and a small thin door that opened onto a somewhat busy avenue in the antiques district on the south side of Lovat. It was a quiet enough area, away from the rougher warrens, but not particularly elevated. Across the cramped streets, hawkers sold vases, while up the road, outside a rug merchant shop, a man sold antique suits. There was also Dubois' new storefront to the east. He dealt in religious artifacts and trinkets. The shopkeep hadn't liked it when he moved in. It had somehow changed the feel of the old warren. Odd folks had started showing up shortly after St. Olmsted's religious antiques opened. Black-clad priests, Hesterians in yellow robes, and a few deeper cultists in their gray sackcloth rags. It had set the entire warren on edge. The optics shop had been a hand-me-down from the shopkeep's father. By rights, it should have belonged to one of his older brothers, but his father had chosen to skip tradition and had given the shop to him. Why he, a middle son of the brood, had come to inherit an old optical shop, he would never fully understand. "You have a good head on your shoulders, not like those worthless ingrates you call your brothers," his father had declared. It hadn't been much of an answer, yet he had been grateful for the responsibility. He had many children of his own, and the shop brought in a modest income with little effort on his part. He and his expansive family were quite comfortable. Not rich, but comfortable. It had always amused the shopkeep that he dealt in spectacles. He had never been particularly interested by the human fabrications. His own kind had keen eyes that didn't fade with age. It was almost comical, an Anner dealing in spectacles. His father loved the little contraptions of glass and metal. He treated each like a precious gem, even if the old fellow couldn't wear a pair himself. He would go on and on about the styles, explain how glass could be ground into various concave shapes to read just a human's vision. He was also known to speak at length about proper fitting. The shopkeep chuckled to himself. Even now, when visiting his father in the convalescent home, the old Anner would spend more time inquiring into the shop's latest procurements than asking about his numerous grandchildren. "I'll be right with you, just putting away some product," the shopkeep said to the newly arrived customer. He could hear the footsteps slow behind him. He slid a boxed pair of single-focus lens onto a shelf with some others, listened to the muffled footsteps of his latest customer across the wood floor near the door to the soft carpet that covered most of the shop's floor. The radio continued its crackly cadence, adding a little bit of noise to what would otherwise be an eerily silent shop. The selection from the caravan master had been varied. Lots of unique prescriptions, a few odd styles, and a pair of brow lines that were in near perfect condition. Brow lines had fallen out of style decades earlier, but the shopkeep had a particular client who preferred them. This pair would fetch nearly triple what he had paid. He had always felt that the shop was a necessity for the races of Lovat. While his own kind didn't suffer fading eyesight, the city was full of humans, Dominions, Dogger, and Mara, who all had a need for spectacles. The multi-leveled city was crawling with the dim-eyed, and unless you were flush with coin and lived in the elevated levels, finding an eye doctor, let alone a manufacturer of spectacles, was nearly impossible. That's where Russell & Sons Optics, Maynard Avenue, 4th level, South Lovat, stepped in. "Sorry for the delay," apologized the shopkeep, shifting around to look at his customers. "Now what can I do for you?" He blinked his bulbous eyes and distractedly scratched behind one, a nervous tic he had developed over years of haggling. Waldo had always called it his tell. "I can always tell when you're going to try to screw me," the caravan master would say with a laugh. "You scratch just behind your left eye, then you lowball me." "Do not," he would declare. "You do so, and that skin of yours darkens a deep gray-green, like an Anner blush." Waldo was right, of course. The shopkeep knew it, but his trick was all for naught. His shop was empty. Bizarre. He could have sworn he heard someone enter, even as Wall left. The bell had rang out, hadn't it? The shopkeep looked around the small space, turning his gaze left and right, his wide frown deepening. It was midday, and the shop was shadowed and dark, the small lamps on the ceilings providing little light among the dark wood shelves that lined the walls, floor to ceiling. Hundreds of precious pairs of eyeglasses filled cubbies all around him, each labeled in the shopkeep's meticulous hand, but there was no one to be seen. Outside, gray streaks of rain cascaded down in sheets from the streets above, their colors shifting as they passed in front of the sodium and neon that lit Maynard Avenue. Pedestrians moved past the glass fronts, collars turned up, hats pulled low, papers tucked into their arms. Steam rose from the streets below. It looked downright miserable and cold, but this deep in Lovat, it was always cold. The crackle of the radio faded as another sound came on, and a wail from ages past, sung by what sounded like a marrow voice. The voice rasped through the speakers, filling the shop, low and rumbly, a tune about summer long since past, before the stars had been right, before the earth had changed. The shopkeep shrugged at his empty shop and settled his thick body onto a stool behind the counter. He read his newspaper and sipped at his chicory with wet slurps. It was dull, but it passed the time. He was halfway into an article about new construction approved for Holgate Hill when he felt the eerie sensation of being watched. He looked up from his paper. A shadow stood across from him. It was both opaque and transparent at the same time, seemingly there and not, vaguely human in form and female. He could recognize the curve of the hip and the swell of the breast in the shadow, but it was hardly discernible. He half fell, half slipped off his stool in surprise, crumpling to the floor before shakily rising, his back pressed to the cubbyholes as he held his paper out before him like a shield. The shadow turned its head slowly, studying him. Eyes that glowed like coals stared at him from within black pits. The shopkeep had only seen a few Umbra in his life. Their kind usually hung out in the warrens to the north, or could be seen in the rougher cities like Destiny in the south. They were a rare sight in Lovat. Those he had seen usually wrapped themselves in multiple layers of clothing to make their forms as discernible as possible. It was considered more polite. Openly flaunting their form like this one was threatening behavior. The shopkeep's hand shook, loose curtains of skin that hung from his chin quavered. He yelped in surprise. One moment the Umbra was on the other side of the counter, and the next she was atop it. If she had moved, the shopkeep didn't see it. She was just there, a black mist standing above him. Coal-red eyes stared down at him as tendrils of black drifted away from her shoulders, elbows, ankles, and toes. No wonder he hadn't seen her. She had probably blended herself into the shadows of the shop. Can I help you? He squeaked. His mouth had gone dry. He licked his lips nervously with a thick amphibian tongue. No response. The shadow stood there, menacing, silent, that odd tilt to the head as she looked down at him, once both innocent and eerie. We have a wide selection of frames and lenses. I'm sure we can find you something. Did Umbras even need glasses? He hadn't recalled seeing one in his shop before. The shopkeep pressed backward into the cubbies behind him and felt the old wood pressing lines in his flesh. The Umbra stepped down before him in a fluid, supple motion. She was at least half a head taller than he and significantly more lithe. He smiled a wide smile and then let out a nervous chuckle that died when he saw what she held in her hand. A large straight razor hung loosely in the shadow's left hand, the naked blade reflecting unintelligible, twisted shapes. The shopkeep dropped his newspaper and raised his hands defensively. Look, I don't want any trouble, he began. The straight razor flashed out. It was perfect, smooth, and deadly sharp. He tried to react, but the Umbra was faster, and he was graceless. She caught his neck. The blade from the razor cut into his throat sac, splitting arteries and shattering both his windpipes. A surge of blood gushed from his throat and seemed to pass through the Umbra as if she wasn't there. The shopkeep gurgled and clutched at his throat, his thick black blood covering his hands and soaking into the white linen shirt and gray trousers. He slid down to his knees and then collapsed, his back against the wall. He could feel his body convulsing as his heart pumped blood of the open wound. He didn't understand. The shadow bent over him, looked at him again with a strange tilt of the head. He wanted to cry out. Wet tears rolled down his cheeks, and by the smell he knew he had pissed himself. Slowly, methodically, the Umbra drew the straight razor across his face, cutting above his lips, below his nose. He felt the blade continue its cuts, tracing the oval around his upper and lower lips across his chin. The shopkeep gurgled through hot flashes of pain. The Umbra drew back. peeling his lips away from his face like a sticker. She looked at him, and then at his lips, holding them in the black palms almost inquisitively. Blood dripped from the flesh, seemed to pass through her hand and spatter on the floor. The shopkeep stared in horror. Seeing his mouth sitting in the hands of this umber woman was too much to bear. He was panicking, but his arms refused to move. He wanted to kick out, but his feet felt anchored to the ground. He felt his 3 hearts slowing, and somehow he knew he wouldn't be going home. He would miss the family meal. He would not see his brood. He would miss his wives. He would never see his aging father again. The radio droned on, the Marrow's voice a rumbly lullaby. The Umbra stepped away, taking the shopkeep's lips with her, drifting across the room toward the front of the narrow shop. She disappeared out the front door. The doorbell tinkled softly. So that was the prologue of my book, The Stars Are Right. It's the first in the Bell Forging cycle. The second book came out last year in October, and I just handed the third book off to my editor. As I said before, when I started this, I can't take questions just yet. I will be happy to take questions, but I have to go get my phone. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. If enough people were really interested, I might do this again. It's been fun. I like reading this stuff since I wrote it. Yeah. So give me 1 second. I'll come grab my phone and we can do questions.